If you're watching this, chances are you're a fan of role-playing games. Let me conjure you a mental cutscene. It's summer break and you're sitting at the entertainment room with your older brother as he's playing Dragon Age 2 for the Xbox 360. The sun is producing a glare. Instead of commenting on it, you stay quiet for fear the gigantic fireball will turn its attention to you and the strawberry shortcake popsicle you have gripped like a child orangutan. You didn't grab a plate and don't care enough to fetch one from the kitchen about a dozen steps away, but you're playing fast and loose sitting on the carpet. As you watch your brother knocking arrows, doing sick flips, and gathering sovereigns for the Deep Road expedition for Act 1, you start to get impatient. The main character is just doing errands for a bunch of random people. When does the game really begin, you think, after watching your eldest Hawk walking through the same warehouse 3 times in the same session of play? And it's not that the game is bad, the companions seem alright, with interesting style designs, the music is immersive, the main character's class armor looks so awesome you want to don those threads now. But the city is so gross, it's full of squalor and misery. Ash flies through the sky in the lower districts, and it's just not a good time. Okay, maybe you don't think highly of it. If we just finish this part, then the game can truly begin. And then you finish Act 1. You and your brother are hit with a different feeling. Sad in a way you weren't expecting, both for how the expedition turned out, and a grim discovery outside of the disc. As if the game pulled up a chair you've seen in 16 different rooms, looked you in the eyes, and said, "Buddy, this is the game." You also just noticed the popsicle dripped on the carpet. Son of a bitch. Time is a weird way of changing your outlooks and attitudes. I sometimes notice that feeling with games. Being smitten with this form of entertainment as a wee lad constantly filters what kind of games you really enjoy and what you don't. The tagline, "An open world with hundreds of hours of content," which would have once filled a younger me with awe, now produces the same reaction to someone reminding me of an obscure yet embarrassing personal lore I had buried in the tomb of denial. Just put it back in the box, it's fine. But sometimes we can flip around on stuff we didn't like before, look at it from a different angle, and see more than we first thought. In fact, that is one of my favorite parts about doing this and making videos on games. Now granted, I'm no big cheese, but a trait that binds all creatives together is following the whims of personal curiosity, fiddling around with ideas, styles, and looking at a subject from a different angle where the light doesn't normally shine. Such vehicles of wonder can make some pretty cool stuff. You also grow an appreciation for creative works in a way that number rankings or scores can't really articulate. Such is this particular example with Dragon Age 2. I had my mindset years ago. I thought it was a bad game. I watched reviews that confirmed my biases, and for a good chunk of time, that was Dragon Age 2. A huge disappointment from the initial title that started it all. But when I played through the series years later, I actually started to get into it. People I talked with enjoyed it as well, which blossomed into respect for the game. Because Dragon Age 2 is one of the gutsiest sequels to a game I've ever played, originally titled Dragon Age Exodus. Its limitations of around 18 months of development made it something so completely alien to the conventional idea of what a sequel is supposed to be. When I look at this game, I see a playable exploration of disempowerment, of clinging to the bonds forged, and how one carries on when severed outside their control. That's what I want to explore today. If you're still interested, fetch a tankard if you got it, and enjoy as I tell you a story about another guy telling a story. That guy is Varric Tethras, questioned by Cassandra Pentagast, seeking answers to what caused the world in flames, and the role the champion of Kirkwall played in striking the match. So Varric spins a tale taking place over 7 years, one that starts before they earned their title and was simply known as Hawk. This is one of the bold decisions 2 starts with. In Dragon Age Origins, you were the warden, but that general role gave a lot of freedom. Their race and life experience was up to you. In the sequel, besides their gender, appearance, and class, the rest is set in stone. You're Hawk, eldest of your 2 siblings, Bethany the Apostate and Carver the Soldier. Your father passed away, and you all live with your mother Leandra. Here's an interesting way to compare the 2 protagonists right out the gate. In Origins, you made a pit stop at Lothering. Darkspawn are on the way, so villagers are packing their things. It's also a place to pick up some casual side quests. As you progress through the game and look at Lothering on the overworld map, it's overrun by Darkspawn. Impossible to revisit. The Blight is approaching, and you need to carry on with your task. It's just a place. In Dragon Age 2, that small village near the Imperial Pass was your home. You're not the hero to save the kingdom. You and your family are some lucky refugees who ran fast enough not to get swallowed whole by the Blight. But it's not smooth sailing. The prologue sets up a couple of interesting aspects. First is the relationship with your family. As the eldest sibling, you're calling the shots, but it's not just about you. Your sister Bethany is easy to get along with, leaning towards the friend side of the affinity bar, while Carver needs a ladder to get off your back. When you come across other refugees, a soldier, Aveline, and her husband, Sir Wesley, and having a Templar discover an apostate would be serious trouble if the Blight wasn't around them. So protocol is put aside and human connection is forged in the name of survival. And it works. For most of the group. Wesley contracts the taint, and one of your siblings will fall to an ogre. If you play a warrior or rogue, Carver will be crushed. If a mage, Bethany. It's out of your hands. Survival only presented when the Witch of the Wild's Flemeth offers protection if Hawk does a simple favor in the future. As the warden that would be known as the hero of Ferelden, there was tragedy and misfortune abound, but also a purpose. Travel the kingdom, appeal to the better parts of the main factions, and save the world. It was a hero's journey. Hawk is not the hero. Much like the prologue, the tale of Hawk is one of unavoidable suffering. They don't set a course in the open sea of opportunity. They, much like many others, tread water to stay afloat. To add to this idea, let us return to the prologue. Guided by Flemeth, the family lies in the lower parts of an old ship. 2 weeks of seafaring brings them to their new home, Kirkwall, the City of Chains. Weeks of hope dashed as guards refused entry and declared if refugees can't provide, they're not going to reside. Back on the boats, you unfortunate scapegoats. A small moment occurs that highlights this desperate situation. When the party gets a captain to entertain looking for a family connection, Uncle Gamlin, a group of weary mercenaries attack, desperation getting the better of them. It's another combat encounter, but one I can't fault the mercenaries for. The gates are a rigged game, a horrible occurrence for everyone involved. Entry requires a little something to grease the palms that block them. If I were in their situation with that skill set and there were a few of us, I probably would have done the same thing. And ironically, saving the captain from this encounter is what gets him to look for your uncle. Our party benefits from the unintended sacrifice of others. But the struggles continue. After 3 days of waiting, Gamlin is found, not as a noble we assumed, but a gambler who lost the family estate. His only solution to open the city gates is to pledge yourself to a group of smugglers or mercenaries for a year without pay. With no other alternative, you take the offer and begin your life in Kirkwall. I find this introduction to be as fascinating as it is bleak. Our character may be able to fight Darkspawn and cast fireballs, but there's a narrative intention to show that won't amount to much when the doors to a better life are barred shut, regardless of your capabilities. The Hawk family could have just as easily been another nameless bunch waiting in the lines, if not for being at the right place at the right time. This split from Origins is what I find makes Dragon Age 2 so interesting as a sequel. Its narrative shares more with European RPGs than Western ones, less Skyrim and more pathologic. You're not the arbiter of adventure, rubbing elbows with all the interesting people across the world, you're Hawk. And currently, that's short for unpaid intern. With a shorter development time than the original, as mentioned in a developer behind the scenes, they wanted to go for a more personal and grounded story. For all the game's missteps I'll get into later, I think this narrative decision was brilliant. Also, I must have been yakking for ages. My god, it's been a year since the prologue. Hawk and their other siblings served their time and are looking to make some money. An expedition into the deep roads is the current goal. The planner, Bartrand, refuses, but his brother, Varric, will gladly take your company if you can display some gusto. Ideally 50 sovereigns with a map through the tunnels. Fetch that terrible grocery list and you're in. Since he's got nothing else going on, maybe he'll tag along with you. This is the premise for Act 1, down on your luck mercenaries grinding for better things. The current residency of the Hawks is Gamlin's rundown shack in Lowtown. A cramped space for a family of 4 adults and a Babari warhound, but hey, it's something. There's some main quests to do, but a good chunk is dedicated to doing side jobs. This act is the longest in the game, and unfortunately, it's also the low point. It's here where you start to learn how repetitive the game can be. Side quests will often having you show up to a particular zone and deal with a bunch of enemies or find an item. The problem is, you will be traveling throughout these same locations all the time. Maybe you'll start at a different point, but if you see the mansion map once, you'll recognize the interior every single time. Same with caves, warehouses, tunnels, mountain passes, alleyways, the list goes on. And sometimes the game will be a bit cheeky about where ingredients or companion armor upgrades are. You could head to a map, look at a crate or bone pile and find some miscellaneous junk, check the same pile again on a certain quest, and looky here, what a scrumptious find! Combat encounters have a habit of spawning more enemies after defeating a wave. Sometimes it makes sense, like bandits hopping down from rooftops to ambush. Other times they just teleport in with the opacity sliding from 0 to 100 before your eyes. When you pick up on the trick, it starts to sink in there's a half-finished feel of Dragon Age 2, an apologetic attitude that if they were given more time, the developers would have added more to keep it fresh. Like boss fights, where you wear them down by giving the old knuckle supper, then suddenly refuse to take damage and summon mobs until they realize that a greatsword actually would hurt them and their health should reflect that. This epiphany will occur multiple times in the same fight. I very much agree these things are frustrating from a player's perspective. I felt that quite a bit on this replay. Accepting the game for what it is, I've also got another viewing from the non-combat stuff. This constant repetition of locations creates a unique bond between the player and Hawke. The City of Change shackles the idea of exploring a vast world. Day trips outside of the city, like the Wounded Coast and Sunder Mound, are the closest you get. In ideal circumstances, the Hawks wouldn't have had to leave Lothering, but the world often acts in ways that aren't ideal for those living within it. With Hawke being a regular person, oftentimes it's about finding your way when the odds are stacked against you. Of course, there are goals you want to accomplish or places you want to be, absolutely. But there are times where the specifics of your circumstances may make those goals seem much further down the line than where you are at the moment. So you and Hawke acknowledge the present is not ideal, yet move your feet one step at a time to the same cave you visited 2 hours ago to go a little bit further this time to fight a guy or grab an item to get one mark closer to where you're hoping to be. The repetition of the areas in combat creates a surprisingly effective experience of going through the motions that can be both depressing and mundane in a way that links you and Hawke into making the best of a bad situation. While on the subject, I do want to talk a little bit about Hawke and the game's presentation. As mentioned earlier, Hawke is an established character. They have a family, they have a certain voice, and they have a backstory that is uncompromising. Origins gave you the title of Warden and allowed you to personalize them, like building a character specific to a campaign setting. 2 has you functioning like an actor bringing a part to life. For this game, I actually like the dialogue wheel. Ideally, I prefer the option of text-based choices that offer more variations and with no speaking lines allows a player's imagination to wonder what they would sound like. With that said, with the direction of making an established character, I think it works. It's not so much how you engage with dialogue, rather how you direct Hawke's personality. The 3 main options boil down to green/blue as your diplomatic, helpful good guy type, purple more of a jokey mercenary attitude, and red a more forceful, direct approach. There's also options to ask for more information that's usually on the left side of the dialogue wheel. What I like about this system is how it shapes your version of Hawke. If you find yourself picking one attitude more than the others, the game will keep that in mind. So when Hawke starts conversations or responds without input, it'll be delivered with that attitude. This was done to keep his personality consistent throughout the game and having your dialogue choices stacked so there are no abrupt flips from shouting at a guy and responding to their fearful whimpers with, "That makes a lot of sense, thank you for sharing that with me." It remembers how you're playing the character and acts accordingly, and could offer some exclusive dialogue. In Act 2, I was pinned down with some guardsmen, dealing with a rogue mage, and because my guy was suave and diplomatic, he gave a rousing speech that an abrasive or snarky Hawke couldn't. And you could still mix it up. Maybe there's a conversation where the sympathetic version of the character loses their patience. Maybe a quipster Hawke reveals a heart of gold, or a brutal attitude cracks a joke. If you're playing a custom character whose attitudes are up to you, a dialogue wheel would be infuriating. How you think a line will sound could be completely at odds with how it's delivered, but because of this personal framing, I think this approach works and I enjoy it. I want to mention that my character did change visually during my playthrough, and it's not because of blood magic. I did indulge in that arcane vice, make her preserve me, but I had a good reason. You see, I thought the promotional trailer for Dragon Age 2 was like the cat's PJs, man. You had the cinematic with the stylized grittiness, a mage version of Hawke wipes blood on his face like sunscreen, an electric guitar shredding as he's soloing the Aeroshock like a warrior. How does that even work? Answer, I don't know, but it looks sick. And while looking into the subject, I came across this behind-the-scenes video where art director Matthew Goldman was talking about how in the conceptual stages he was pitching for the main character. He was going to be Ulish von Hawke, a lycanthrope that would howl during combat and swig their own blood. It sounded so awesome in that I understand and respect nuance and subtlety art is capable of conjuring about life and the human condition. But I want some of that, please, kind of mindset. So I got to thinking, I'd love to incorporate that with my character. I can't wait to have my creation channel that original idea. So I picked a mage, spec'd into blood magic, and was hoping to have my custom character don that blood flourish on his nose. Tiny problem. That look is preset only. My speculation was this was an Easter egg for the original concept. If I wanted the cool trademark hawk swish, I needed to take it with the amber-colored eyes and the straight-edged, 90-degree angle beard on the sides. How do you even maintain that? That's incredible. When seeing this, I thought, I don't negotiate with character creators. So I made my guy spiky blonde hair and smooth skin. Hours later, when I started to get a feel for the city again, I caved, walked to the Black Emporium, sheepishly approached the mirror, and moved my cursor to get as close to oolish as I could. And that's because Kirkwall sucks. Not in the, oh, you just have to get to know the city better, travel outside the tourist spots, feel the culture, it's great way. The city is a hive of misery. No one wants to be here. There are things that make this place so awful for everyone involved. And for the record, if anyone travels off the main streets to get a better feel of the city, that's gonna feel like a knife in the ribs. Man, the bloomin' roses got thorns. Kirkwall, the city of chains, was once a part of the Tevinter Imperium, millions of slaves brought to work the quarries. Currently, it's considered a free city, but the title sounds more hopeful than the reality. The stains of the past are felt in every step and every slab of stone in the buildings and walls. When you pass the black cliffs that inspired its current name, your first glimpse of the city is the gallows. I'd like to read you a portion of history from the Codex entry. In Pursuit of Knowledge, The Travels of a Chantry Scholar by Brother Genitivi. Statues of tortured slaves fill the gallows courtyard, a ghastly memento of Kirkwall's history. 1,500 years ago, Kirkwall was the Tevinter Imperium's largest quarry, feeding the construction of the Imperial Highway. The Imperium's hunger for expansion led to legions of slaves forced into working the quarry. When the Empire's construction phase ended, Kirkwall slid naturally into its new role as the capital of the slave trade, the gallows at its heart. The statues are now monuments to the suffering of slaves. Every inch and angle of the courtyard was designed by magisters bent on breaking the spirit of newcomers. Executions here took place daily, sometimes hourly, and corpses were hung from gibbets throughout the yard. New slaves trudging in from the docks saw what awaited them. When Our Lady turned her armies against the Imperium, the slaves of Kirkwall revolted and claimed the city for themselves. The gallows stood empty for 200 years, not to be reopened until the crowning of Divine Justinia I. The gallows transformed the city again when the abandoned prison tower became home of Kirkwall's Circle. Walking in the city is oppressive. It's colored in dingy tans and browns. In the lower district, ash flies across the sky. In places like Darktown, you can gaze below and see the cliffs scale up like a massive titan, vertically conveying just how trapped you are here. Ramshackle barrels or crates are spread across, spikes are added to the top of buildings and on the railings of stairs. Even places that should seem pleasant, like the Hightown or important keeps, are impersonal and cold, uniform in their construction. Wait until the sun goes down and that illusion of safety is taken like a sandcastle in the tide. The city-state is also known to be one of the most chaotic for mages. The Veil, the plane of demons and spirits, is rather thin here, meaning it's easier for them to show up even when not intentionally invited. And with the heavy use of blood magic, spellcasting that's rumored to have caused the first blight so long ago, this leads to a crackdown from the organization policing them, the Templars, run by the Chantry. But we'll get more into that as time marches forward. Are you by chance familiar with the Bone Pit? I'd like to tell you about the Bone Pit. As if the city wasn't bleak enough, I'd like to tell you another sample of Kirkwall's dark history and view of it. A story about a quarry, a reading from another codex, a letter from Prefects Sanitaris, 35 Ancient. I interviewed the surviving slave this morning. She was horror-struck, but managed to tell me her chilling story. The overseer lined 17 slaves up, one behind the other, at the lip of the quarry. The second slave in line was ordered to push the man in front over the edge. The third slave pushed the second, the fourth the third, and on it went. Workers in the quarry heard the screams, the crack of bone against rock, and then the survivors' anguished cries as the overseer's dragging lines feasted on the 16 helpless bodies splayed upon the quarry's basin. The woman who told me this story was the 17th in line, spared only because no one stood behind her. The responding message demanded the writer speak of this to no one. Kirkwall is a city that is built on blood and cruelty. As if the straightforward displays of suffering wasn't enough, it also plays the vile trick of giving the impression you were seeing the worst of it on the surface, only to dig deeper and realize even that was a lie, as sneaky as the many underground tunnels throughout the city. And this is the location where you are constantly backtracking to areas you've been before. This is the place you have begrudgingly called home. and a rather chilling consideration is, however awful this is, what's the alternative? There's nowhere else to plant roots. The best option is to make the most of what you got. Here's where another part of 2 comes in that I find myself appreciating this time around. I think the companions in 2 are great, not just for the personalities or voice work, but how they function in these unique circumstances of this game. The champion's story is woven over years, and the companions grow and change along with it. Some for better, others for worse, but time ticks forward nonetheless. One of my favorites has to be Aveline, the soldier who travels with us to Kirkwall. With Wesley contracting the taint, she doesn't have anyone else in her life besides the Hawks. During Act 1, she joined the city guard and the role fits her like a glove. Purpose and duty act as mental stability, so she welcomes the role. She's stalwart to those she's close to. There's some party dialogue that indicates she's been having guards looking out for the Hawks. Time away from work is spent journeying with the main character. Her class as a warrior and unique guardian spec reflects this in combat, weathering blows as her party whittles down opponents. Your main character and Aveline don't have high energy banter with one another, but more of a tried and true bond. The two of you met under unusual circumstances, and if the scenario was different, probably wouldn't have stuck around each other. But for as miserable as Kirkwall is, it's what brought you together. Her companion quest in this act has you pull corruption from the guards' ranks, and ends with Aveline getting a promotion to captain. It's easy to root for her, the good cop sincerely trying to make the city a better place, a bright spot in a dark city like Kirkwall. As the years go by, the two of you remain close. What started as a partnership of survival turns into a genuine bond on par with that of blood. And much like bonds related to that, Aveline's got her flaws. She's rigid in her opinions of what's correct and will clash with those who go against that, player character or other companions. She's direct too. If she doesn't like something, that will be very clear. Both of these on display when talking with Isabella, a companion who is so Aveline's opposite it brings out the worst in her. As time goes on, she moves her way up in the city, even pursuing a romance not related to your character, which you can help as one of the game's most charming quests. She highlights the kind of bond that may not be the most exciting, but is so paramount in shaping our lives that it's difficult to imagine life without them. Speaking of paramount, pull up a chair. It's time for Varric. This fellow right here is my go-to character when thinking about Dragon Age 2. A rather difficult feat considering he's a supporting member. Storyteller, marksman, and all-around pal, Varric is the closest person to being Hawk's best friend. Once he joins in Act 1, he'll be sticking around until credits. The recipe to get into Varric's good graces is easy. Look out for people and crack a joke when the opportunity arises. Bones at your feet. What I find interesting about Varric in this recent playthrough is how static he is. Compared to Aveline or other companions we'll talk about later, Varric is fairly consistent in a way that's understated. He creates the impression of what you see is what you get, quick with a joke and a smile. Yet he never really talks about himself for long. A brief mention here and there, but then it's on to the next topic, like how is Kirkwall treating you? His framing as the game's narrator also plays into some trickster elements. Occasionally, he'll describe a scene that never happened. The game's first combat encounter is a great example of this. Or when he shows up for his companion quest in Act 2, is he playing with the listener to make sure she's paying attention, trying to hide details, or something else? Beats me, but I'll listen anyway. The game has this cool idea for companions affinity, where instead of having a bar from 0 to 100, it's a scale labeled friend and rival. Getting on their good side leans towards the former, while against it is the latter. This is cool because if you lose affinity, it's not lost, rather adding towards that particular direction, and regardless of your companion's position on the bar, they'll still adventure with you. If it gets near the end of either side, the character gets a unique buff and some text describing their relationship to Hawk. Varric's text for both is great. If you're friends, one of these days Varric will tell your story. If rivals, one of these days Varric will tell your story. Whether you like it or not, stay in his good side or he'll tell the seeker about that boneless women comment. I really enjoy trickster characters in fantasy stories because compared to arcane casters or sturdy warriors, rogues are just regular people who are just really good at this one avenue. It grounds them in a way others aren't. And Varric's got your back no matter what, even to fulfill a debt he's not a part of. In the mountain ranges to the north lies Sundermound, the spot Hawk will fulfill their promise from the prologue. And this highlights one of their main character flaws, that being, they aren't omnipresent. Which is a quirky way to say Hawk did nothing wrong. Embodying this character and seeing how situations evolve, you get an understanding that Hawk was stuck in the middle of all these events and really trying their best, such as this act atop Sundermound. Let's look back to Origins real quick. Flemeth, the infamous Witch of the Wild, saved your Grey Warden from the Battle of Ostagar and helped spur your adventure across Ferelden. And as you travel and get to know her daughter Morrigan better, you learn Flemeth is many things, but human is not one of them. And if you played Witch Hunt, your companion mentions how she isn't dead either. At the time, you may think, oh, that's bad. I wonder how that happened. Anyway, cut back to Dragon Age 2, where you meet a group of Dalish, trek up a mountain peak with a new companion, and perform a ritual with the gifted locket where Flemeth pops back up and the player is struck by a huge knee made of iron with the words "dramatic" on the side. Maker preserve me, I'm a few hours in and I've released the Mother of Vengeance back into the world. Hawk may have done the actions, but I got him there. That's on me, I'm sorry, Hawk. This is what makes the tale of Dragon Age 2 so fascinating. When looking at the story from an outside perspective, it's easy to see Hawk as this force of nature, unleashing all these problems in the world. But embodying this character, seeing the options they had, you get the impression they were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. And if anything, that complicity is felt on the player. Since this is a sequel, players are allowed to import saves from Origins to personalize their game states, choices and past events referenced by other characters, and since this is a new group and thus a new perspective in the world, when Flemeth alludes to what happened to her and what she's going to do, Hawk may be in the dark, but playing through the games, you already know this and realize your hand in this event. Ultimately, this was a decision the writers made. But by having you fulfill this task, one that isn't even a huge focus, once the quest is done, Flemeth will be gone for the rest of the game, you get a first-hand experience how small decisions can snowball into world-altering consequences. And might be grateful this isn't your problem right now. And that's very true. For Dragon Age 2. Speaking of now, it's Meryl. She's a character I can't quite pin down. Originally from the Dalish elf opening in Origins, now sporting a glow-up and a new voice in 2. She now keeps a distance from her clan. Personality-wise, she's often ditzy and timid that contrasts with the pragmatism to her purpose. The Dalish are people that cling to the few remembered ways of their ancestors. Meryl reasons they should rediscover this past no matter what. So her current project is to repair an alluvion, indulging in some blood magic to help speed up the process. But combining these two L's does not make a W, and that ambition has ostracized her from home, playing with forces that aren't worth the cost. When Hawk and the party meet her, she's getting ready to leave to Kirkwall's alienage, to see the wider world and to get some peace of mind from the dodgy looks of others. And the relationship takes on a unique angle. You start as one of the few friendly faces in an alien city. Her first look at Kirkwall is quite the rude awakening. As the years pass and the friendship or romance blooms, her obsession with the goal becomes more prevalent, and you gotta figure out if you support that mission or talk her against it. Either way, she'll stay the course. I also had this weird talent where on paper, Meryl and I would get along swimmingly, yet most conversations ended with rivalry points and I'm sitting here like, what did I do wrong? My current theory is while my guy was trying to be diplomatic, the options I picked were things that sounded polite but not really reassuring, i.e. Meryl, they're afraid of me, Hawk, what? No, of course they're not. Cut to that time a guy ran deeper into a monster cave to get away from her, that kind of stuff. Her connection to blood magic and the more taboo aspects mixed with her personality makes a unique combination. And now I want to mention a bit about Fenris. I often hear this character mentioned in two camps. Either he's an incredibly edgy caricature that fits more in line with the Japanese role-playing game from the mid-2000s, or I can fix him. I gotta say, I definitely leaned in the first option when I first played compared to the other characters. He stuck out like a sore thumb. Well, I do feel that a smidge now. I actually think Fenris is alright, mainly because while he certainly has some grittiness in his character, I thought it contrasted nicely with another side, a sheepish naivety that humanizes him. On the outset, he's got markings spread across his body from time as a Tevinter slave, a past forgotten, wielding a big sword and a skepticism of any spellcasters. Yet he's the same guy who will keep a cool and threatening tone 1 second, and then will crumble in a, oh, I see, the next. When dealing with the topic like mages and templars, Fenris leaned towards the latter, a perspective born from suffering by magisters. Power corrupts, so it should be kept in line. If your Hawk is a mage, he'll be quite cautious of you, wondering if you're just another who will hurt him. Yet, in most other topics, there's a genuine confusion at other parts of life besides his experiences. Like in Act 2, Fenris will assume the worst in you, taking a slave as your own after saving her. Classic Magister move he'll convey bitterly. But Hawk will respond, I'm giving her a job, Fenris, and he'll go, oh, I see. My bad. There's an embarrassment that he believes the worst in people. But with the past he's had, it makes total sense. Everyone he remembers treated him horribly. Why open the door so more people can close it in his face? There's a conversation where he admits that revenge and hatred is all he knows. Hawk's suggestion of building a new life scares him. The desire to tackle something new you wanted to try and being inexperienced can lead to uncertainty and low self-confidence in yourself. Yet, it's possible. One of my favorite character banters was in Act 3 between Fenris and Varric. As we're walking in Darktown, I catch the two setting up a game of dice at a local tavern with Isabella. It's missable dialogue, but I love this. It's like in the years that passed, Fenris opened himself up to others, and when not adventuring around the same dungeons, he's got friends to spend time with. A much better spot than isolating himself in the mansion paid with suffering. In fact, that's what I love about the companions. By themselves, they're great. I think 2 does a great job at making these companions have a group dynamic. Not just how they get along with Hawk, but how they get along with each other. Sometimes when you meet up at a companion's home, they'll be talking with other characters, and most of the time, it's Isabella who shows up. That's one of the great things about her character. You take a look at her and get an assumption. A swashbuckler with a heart of gold and a love for double entendres and innuendo of the naughty nautical variety. That's a pretty solid picture of her. And it's in that confidence that's great. It's a respect for someone who can look in the mirror, see themselves truly, flaws and all, and responding, yeah, that's about right, and walk away satisfied. She often has the most playful banter in the party, noting observations or asking questions the others might not consider polite to say out loud. If you pursue a romance with her, it starts as a straightforward physical interest that builds into an emotional connection slowly over the years. Similar to Fenris, Isabella doesn't want to get hurt if she can avoid it, though her approach is more lighthearted. I could see one saying, "I love you," and she responds with finger crossbows or something. Then there's Anders. I'll discuss him more as the plot evolves. He's a mage that's against the oppression of Templars. If you play the expansion for Origins, Awakening, he'll be a familiar face, though this leads to an interesting problem with the franchise. Ending slides are a common flourish with the Dragon Age series, with the exception of this game. An old school touch to highlight the effects of your choices throughout your quest. I bring this up because I had some weird narrative whiplash. So, I played Dragon Age 2 first, and when you meet this guy and learned he's a fusion of both man and spirit, I was a bit confused but got the gist. While I played Awakening for the first time this year, I came across both Anders and the Spirit, and I was wondering how the game was going to connect the two. Maybe there's a cutscene or epilogue slide to mention it, but that didn't happen. In fact, I got an ending where they were separated, and it leads to this weird clash where my choices didn't line up with how the story was presented. I get trying to adjust stuff as the series goes along. Maybe a current version of a story only works if approached from this option, but for Dragon Age that's really prioritized decisions players would make, this can be individually frustrating. And this is just my small scale version of that. I'll talk more about this idea when I cover Inquisition. But right now, Anders seems like a pretty alright fella, and plot crucial too. He's the guy who knows about the deep roads. I unfortunately can't talk about Sebastian with any personal experience because I don't have the DLC for the game besides the Black Emporium, which let me have a Mabari Warhound. His name is Barkus Rex and he's a good boy. Varric taught him how to play cards. Act 1 is certainly the longest part of the game, but I find the companions making up for the repetition. You're scrappy adventurers, rubbing coins together for a better life, and that's charming. A friend of mine had this line during a late-night McDonald's run that stuck with me for years. Family is related to you by blood, friends connected by choice. These companions from all corners of the city may bicker or bust each other's balls, but they choose to stay together because they care about Hawk and in their own unique ways to each other. In a place like Kirkwall, where misery is built into its history and hasn't learned a thing in the present, with the quests highlighting the clash between Templars and mages, serial killers, deals with the Qunari gone wrong, and plenty of cutthroats, they still ready up anytime Hawk needs them, both because they need them just as much as the main character does, and because that love for other people makes them better. I know this is a standard idea for RPGs, the cast grows to like each other as time goes along, but I think it works really well in 2 because there's no big quest to save the world. It's grounded in personal gain, and it's because the city is so bleak, the forming of these relationships feels strong and grounded. And it's a great reminder that good company can make the worst situations feel tolerable. Now, as Act 1 concludes, there is one more companion I've been saving, and that is the surviving Hawk sibling. For this playthrough, that's Carver. If you asked me my surface level knowledge years ago, I would have told you Carver is really annoying. Yet actually having him as a companion, I could really empathize where he's coming from. In a family of mages, Carver didn't have the gift, and with your character being the eldest and thus top Mabari, he had a massive chip on his shoulder, thus starting out nearing the rivalry end of the affinity scale. Conversations with him aren't like those of Bethany. He's more direct, aggressive in what he values, and quick to point out your shortcomings or bad choices. He'll throw the fact you're an apostate and that's causing problems in your face quite a bit. I was playing a diplomatic hawk for this playthrough, and that has you trying to be patient with him, not taking the bait with insults and just trying to de-escalate when possible. What I could really empathize with in Carver was his anger, his frustration of not being at a place in his life he was hoping, stuck in the shadow of someone he viewed as greater, and how small that made him feel. And attempting to get out of that resulted in him being rejected and ignored. Kirkwall is not the greatest place for opportunity unless you're willing to step on others to get there. Carver can be difficult to deal with, but he's not a bad person. That avenue is off the table. His application for the city guard was rejected by Aveline for his hot-headed attitude and refusal to follow orders. So he's stuck, trapped in a city where he's trying to make a name for himself, and it wants absolutely nothing to do with him. His best option is following his sibling with misgivings, who he loves, yet feels trapped under. And on this playthrough, I could really connect with that, and maybe if you're around my age or older, you can as well. I feel like a child playing a game where the rules keep changing. The path I had lined up the last few turns seemed to have been patched out the next. Of course, the game is going to have ups and downs. It wouldn't be very fun if it was wonderful all the time. But when you're in the lows and your earnest attempts don't seem to be working, it's easy to feel like you're stalling, warping your perspective that the low points are the only turns to play. As someone who's still trying to figure it out, the only bit of advice I feel confident in offering is that the worst thing you can do for yourself is assume your struggles are unique to you. The specifics may be different, but if you're dealing with something, chances are a bunch of other people are too. They could come from all walks of life with different backgrounds to yours, so be sure to keep an open mind. It doesn't cure the problem, but it's a reminder that, ironically, the problems we feel isolate us from others can connect us to the wider world. We just have to get out of our own heads and see the bigger picture. Keep playing the game. It's more fun with you here. When I saw that part of myself in Carver, it was easier to be patient with him. And here's the interesting bit. It's not very difficult to get along. In dialogue, keeping a self-preservation mindset and not making trouble will net affinity. Though being a sibling doesn't always mean you agree with everything they believe. But what Carver will appreciate the most is options where he's valuable or respected. In the Birthright quest, you uncover your grandfather's will, leaving the Hawk estate to your mother, leading to another quest called Family History. Carver will express his frustration to Hawk, and the task culminates in learning the origin of his name, from a Templar who helped your father years ago, one that your brother will see as a symbol to moving forward. Carver wants to be an equal, a peer, not a sidekick. Being a younger sibling, I totally understood that. So when the Deep Roads expedition kicked off and Mama Hawk pleaded not to take my younger brother, I did it anyway. We got here together, and there's no way I'm gonna hog all the glory for myself and leave him behind. Hindsight is a heck of a thing. The expedition goes horribly wrong. Varric's brother goes nuts thanks to a lyrium statue. We ultimately do find the treasure we've been looking for, but unfortunately at a brutal cost. Darkspawn blood is quite the corrupting substance, taking the strongest and slowly wearing them down until there's nothing left. The Deep Roads has plenty roaming about, and Carver is the first line of defense against the demons. So when he collapses after days traveling underground, his fate should be sealed. Your Hawk could have the best gear, do all the side quests, and level up your strongest potions. But if you take your sibling into the Deep Roads, they will contract the taint much like the Dalish Warden in Origins and like Sir Wesley, and there is no cure for that. When I watched my brother play all those years ago, we stared transfixed at the screen as Bethany said her final words. It was brutal. Maybe it was because I was a sibling myself, but the moment really got to me. I couldn't imagine how terrible it would be to see one of the people who knows you best fading right before your eyes and you can't help them. If you don't take Bethany or Carver into the expedition, you still have to say goodbye. Bethany will be sent to a circle and Carver drafted into the Templars. Yet, there is one more option. If you bring Anders into the Deep Roads, he'll put himself at risk, bring you to a group of wardens to induct your sibling into the Order. It's either death or service for the greater good. Take care of yourself, brother. 3 years come and go in the blink of an eye. Things have been good for the remaining Hawks in Kirkwall. They live in the family estate, and the matriarch is thinking of getting back in the dating game. This act may have you asking a question I did the first time I played. Okay, what now? Where are we going with this? Well, this is the story of the champion, and some elements are carried over from the next. Compared to a traditional RPG structure, it's comparatively more meandering. It's only when seeing the full picture that what's focused on makes more sense. Ironically, to my initial feelings, Act 2 is often cited as the game's high point. It both plants the seeds for the finale and offers payoffs for Act 1 in some surprising and satisfying ways. The Viscount of Kirkwall wishes Hawke to de-escalate tensions with the Qunari in the docks, their leader being the Aeroshok. Just before hopping into that stew, I do want to mention the Viscount is understated, mirroring Hawke in a sense, wanting to do good and hoping for the best outcomes for everyone, but trapped in a position where titles and power don't mean anything. A crowned pawn doesn't truly make a king, and he recognizes that. In the few conversations between you, he confides his helplessness as the city nears towards disaster and knows he can't stop it. It's the calm before the storm, and Dragon Age 2 is better for having it. If you've seen my previous video covering Origins, you may have remembered my interest in the Qunari shown by the companion Sten. One of the reasons I really liked that character was because of how effective this title was at showing how they work. As much as I like Sten, by the law of the Qun, that rank is all he is. The Aeroshok is both your main engagement with this culture and Act 2's antagonist. What makes him work as this part's villain is how he doesn't start out that way. In fact, that seed gets planted in the game's first act. During one of the quests, the Black Powder Promise, a merchant wants you to assist in striking up a deal for Qunari explosives. The Aeroshok will state no deal was agreed upon, a misunderstanding spurred by the merchant's desires. If you bring Fenris, he'll talk with the Aeroshok in his tongue, Hawke having the same reaction as discovering one of your buddies speaking fluent Mandarin Chinese when the situation calls for it. The encounter ends with a mutual understanding between you two, and throughout Act 2, that clarity is still there. One that can even turn into respect if you take the time to understand where he's coming from. Most of the Kirkwallers will see the Qunari as savages, a backwards people with a sacrilegious faith, that being the Qun, a philosophy and a code of honor for their people. Yet, when the Aeroshok explains it, it follows a solid logic, and he's not sugarcoating it either. That would be blasphemous. He presents it directly. The Qun is not something to be believed, it's to be understood. Your identity is your profession, and society works when everyone performs what their role demands. Subverting from that is seen as morally reprehensible and will only lead to misery for the culture. If you were born in the Qun and reject it, you're called Tal Vashaf, and that is a fate worse than death. Mages of the culture are known as Cerebos, or dangerous things. They're often presented as prisoners of their own bodies, yet the Qun is so powerful that during a quest, a Cerebos will light himself on fire rather than exist without following it. The Aeroshok and the Qunari under him have been stranded in the city for 4 years looking for an important relic, the original text by their founder. While that's going on, the people of Kirkwall have been making their displeasure known, religious powers framing them for problems they did not cause. The situation, regardless of Hawke's assistance, is reaching a breaking point. You both can respect each other, but when the Qun demands retaliation, that is to be followed. But before that occurs, there is another plotline that culminates in the background. In Act 1, Hawke is on the trail for a serial killer abducting women. 3 years later, the case opens back up, but the initial culprit is a red herring. Then your mother goes missing, and the killer's signature memento of white lilies is left at your estate. So you find a lead, follow a trail leading to a warehouse from 3 years ago. Find the killer and the stitched remains of Leandra, a grotesque collage of body parts and blood magic to recreate his late wife, your mother's facial resemblance sealing her fate. The way the camera conveys this reveal is fantastic. The danger of the Templar and Mage conflict was always in the background, but never really affected your lives in Kirkwall, with the exception if Bethany survived. But this quest makes that conflict more personal when it takes your mother. Letters indicate the killer had assistance in pursuing blood magic from another from the Mage Tower. So far, that correspondent is out of reach. But either way, Hawke will now be alone in Kirkwall. At this moment, I thought back to my recent Origins playthrough. In the City Elf Origin, my father was at the coronation in the epilogue, and he told me how proud he was for saving the day at this moment of triumph. Dragon Age 2 reminds us not everybody gets a happy ending, even if they deserve one. There's no time to truly mourn. The Qunari situation is getting worse when 2 elves join their ranks. The problem being, they committed a murder and the guards wanted to dispense justice. Though listening to them talk about their situation, it's understandable. Protecting a loved one when the city guards ignored them. You can actually confront Evelyn on this. Yet the Aeroshok takes this as the final insult. The elves join this order because this city has failed them, treated as second-class citizens rather than an equal part of the culture. Kirkwall is a place of moral depravity, so there's only one course of action left. Thus, the attack on the city begins. Before confronting the Aeroshok, Hawk gets a proper introduction with the leaders of the Templars and Mages, Knight Commander Meredith and First Enchanter Orsino. At this point in the game, you've heard mention of these characters, but now there's a face to the name, and you all need to work together to deal with the Quinari. On my second playthrough, I thought this was a great plot beat. Whatever happens in Act 3, you're given a glimpse of these characters at their best, disgruntled with each other, yet willing to work together for the good of Kirkwall. Hawk can even cut off their arguments to keep them focused, and both will agree with you. Compromise is still a possibility in Act 2. The last fight of this section can be with the Aeroshok if you refuse to hand over Isabella. If you do, the Quinari leave and the situation is resolved. There are two options: fight as a group, or because the commander respects you so much, you can have an honorable duel. The latter sounds pretty awesome, right? This years-long relationship culminates in an intense boss fight. It's just like the cinematic, but cooler with context. Is what I would love to say if I didn't try it. Regardless of class, this fight is so frustrating. Running away and getting pot shots is the best tactic I can offer. If you're a warrior, you have my sympathy, because it only takes a few hits for the Aeroshok to kill you, regardless of what armor you're wearing. It's an exercise in monotony wearing this guy down, and is actually a great encapsulation of the game itself. Great ideas and style, culminating in a less than ideal execution. After my character got stuck doing the mage combo finisher and budged into a wall, I thought the whole honorable duel idea with the 7-foot-tall Quinari against my robed spellcaster kinda sucked. Sarah bossed my class and just brought my party with me. With the Aeroshok dead, Hawk is finally named the champion of Kirkwall, and at this high point, this would be a traditional finale, a refugee clawing their way up to hero to an adoring public. But it's not.
Oh no! Oh no! No, 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 no.
Act 3 is the climax of the game, leading to a finale that shatters the notion that one hero can prevent the horrible after years bubbling under the surface. You know, the fun stuff. This section of the game is the shortest and quite abrupt in a vacuum, but with the buildup of other parts, its sudden events make a lot of sense. Before the Deep Roads expedition, and before confronting the Aeroshok, the tension between Templars and Mages is constantly on display, with spellcasters wielding incredible powers and being a great gateway for demons to enter the world, and the Knights trained as their protectors and oftentimes wardens. The clenched fist of an iron-plated gauntlet may protect, but can also suffocate those beneath its grip. Through each act are varying perceptions of this conflict. There are mages who understand the good of Templars and those who despise them. You see knights who truly lead with compassion and those by fear. And as you encounter these quests, you may ponder what is correct. Those with magic may have good intentions, but some are deeply troubled by demonic influences or mental illness. Does a one-size-fits-all approach fit best, or does it depend on the circumstances? And does the intense subjugation from the Holy Order do more harm than good? Pushing casters to their breaking point, and then when they crack, a lieutenant says, "You see, this is why mages can't be trusted." It's a constant throughout Kirkwall. If you think back to Origins, the Circle questline could end with a rite of annulment, a decree to terminate all mages if a Grand Cleric thinks a situation is too far gone. Yet the Templar commander Sir Gregor and First Enchanter Irving ultimately understand the other's intentions and can work together. That's not the case in Kirkwall. In Act 3, heated arguments are occurring more and more. Both leaders are looking for the champion to get involved. Who will they support? Each will make their case to you. The only thing keeping Kirkwall together after the Viscount's death is Grand Cleric Elthina. I originally thought Elthina was a strong voice of reason, and then I came across this blog post that made a solid case against her. It'll be in the video's description if you're curious. It's fascinating. Her use of diplomacy preaches for cooler heads, yet closely examining her words makes some dark implications, such as her line, "Would you show the First Enchanter back to the Circle? Gently, if you please." That specification of gently implies regular handling of mages is not. But she's the only one holding back the Knight Commander, who's been getting more paranoid about mages, thanks to the event so far and revealed at the game's conclusion, a lyrium idol Hawk is quite familiar with. Originally, I wasn't a big fan of this plot point. All the horrible action spurred on because Meredith brought a dwarven figurama made of magical crack. Yet when looking at Dragon Age 2 as a story of disempowerment, of people responding to the evils before them and becoming more desperately monstrous to combat it, I find myself liking it more. Meredith's paranoia was always there. With the idol, it just becomes more pronounced. The people before her, citizens and mages alike, were no longer under her protection. They were blood mages, demons wearing skin suits in disguise. Make her preserve us all. Another example of this twisting of their initial intentions is the first enchanter. Between both faction leaders, Orsino is easier to sympathize with. He's polite, willing to compromise if it means the safety of mages, and understands the role of Templars. Yet this approach hides a large skeleton in his closet, being the correspondent with Quentin, the blood mage who killed women, Hawk's mother included. The letter isn't one of concern or caution, rather a gleeful delight in what's been accomplished, with lines like, "Your last letter was fascinating. I shouldn't have doubted your resolve, and I hope you'll keep me appraised of further progress." Orsino saw what this guy was doing and didn't stop it. Worse, he contributed to that suffering in the name of curiosity. Say what you will about the Knight Commander, her attitudes are as direct as a hammer. With his confession at the end of the game, and I'm of two different minds about him. The first is a more Machiavellian viewing. Orsino is both a mage and an elf. In this setting, those two create a double whammy of discrimination. People are gonna hate him regardless of what he says, simply for who he is. Maybe Orsino is so agreeable and willing to compromise because he sees that approach as his best option. Being vocal would only make your critics push back harder, so his eloquence could be a tactic to get what he wants, to hope people come around and see he's not the way they expected. Then there's the second possibility. At the end of the game, when Orsino admits his associations with Quentin as he spills blood and becomes a harvester from the corpses of fellow mages, he says he's tired of running. He's tired of being as understanding as possible when no one bothers to listen, so he decides to become the very monster the Templars expected him to be. Orsino could be a good person pushed too far. His peers' research could have been a pragmatic ace in the hole for a situation like this, where the walls are closing in and there's nowhere else to run. I don't quite know which one is the truth. Perhaps a combination of both, or I'm way off. But what I do know is both the Knight Commander and the first Enchanter end in a much worse place than when they started all those years ago, each feeding off each other before the powder keg goes off. That being our last discussed companion, Anders. Out of all the characters in Dragon Age 2, Anders has the biggest impact in the game. Much like the Templar and Mage leads, his convictions transforming him into something unrecognizable to when he first started. The wisecracking mage who owned a cat named Sir Pouncelot is the same guy who blows up the Chantry, killing the Grand Cleric, leading to Meredith assuming command with the right of annulment as blood runs through the streets of Kirkwall once again. On my first playthrough and hearing about it online, I was angry. I saw it as a contrived plot beat that came out of nowhere. Yet with another playthrough, seeing where we started and knowing where it's going, it makes so much sense. Before the game begins, Anders fuses with the spirit, similar to demons like pride or desire. Spirits are named after virtuous traits like compassion, faith, and in this situation, justice. During Awakening, Justice inhabits the body of a dead warden Kristoff, though a rotting cadaver is not the most stable frame to inhabit, so Anders offers they share his, a spiritual roommate in the old noggin. However, this act of camaraderie leads to an unforeseen problem. Much like a person, a spirit is its happiest when acting on its purpose. The problem arises when you take ideal virtues and bring them to the mortal world. Intentions get twisted into necessary evils. Morally black and white decisions get filtered through so many perspectives it's impossible to make sense without contradictions. Things the Grey Wardens don't normally trouble themselves with. Stop the blight at all costs. Everything else is secondary. Problem is, Anders is not just a Grey Warden. In fact, after serving some time, he pieces out and carries on. And living that life, he witnessed firsthand the plight of mages, all while justice is watching. Why are these people punished for gifts they did not ask for? How can people rationalize this treatment as okay? This is a parody of justice. In Awakening, Anders had no love for the Templars, but he understood why they exist. But combine Anders' personal biases with Justice's sense of chivalry, and they become a unique abomination: vengeance. This is the Anders Hawk meets in Act 1 at a free-of-charge clinic in Darktown, a host of two minds with a duty to punish the wicked. While he can be quite vocal of his anger at Templars, he still cracks jokes and laughs. He's a friend you could get along with. Just don't bring up the subject at a dinner party if you want it to remain pleasant. To get the maps for the Deep Roads, you look into rescuing a friend, only to find he's been made tranquil, a practice that cuts off a mage from their connections to the Fade and takes their emotions so demons have nothing to cling to. Think of it like a magical lobotomy, intended as a last resort for truly dangerous mages. But that intention is not always followed. Years later in Act 2, if you befriend Anders, he'll confide his control is slipping. With Meredith instigating curfews, adding more pressure to mages, he's worried what remains of justice won't be able to handle it. The sensation is getting even stronger. There's a companion quest, hunting down a Templar pushing to have more mages tranquil. When the party deals with them, Vengeance loses control and almost kills a mage we saved, considering her tainted by the Chantry. If Hawk has high enough friendship, they can persuade Anders to spare the mage, where he freaks out and returns back to the clinic. A piece left on a Templar's body indicates there's still hope yet for things to work out. If you show it to Anders, and when he sees even the Knight Commander rejected the tranquil solution, he's at ease, convinced progress can still occur and not all is lost. What this questline does is get you to raise some concerns about Anders. He may have good intentions, but you've seen firsthand it's reaching a point that might not be enough. The danger he poses is starting to outweigh the good. Further proved in Act 3. With the conflict brewing, Anders has turned into a much different person. His party banter is more dire, the occasional joke silenced with grim determination. He's more confrontational with companions too, demanding them to take a side and insulting those who don't align with his outlook. He and Fenris get the most antagonistic about it, both leaning towards one side of the coin and will challenge each other's beliefs anytime they talk. The complicated part is that both have a point. Freedom is a crucial part of life for satisfaction and fulfillment. The ability to pursue what you want and carve a place in the world is a universal desire. The same with safety, contentment, and peace of mind, knowing that the dangers of the world are kept away from you and those you love. Yet, what if one's definition of freedom results in abusing their power? A person's freedom is all well and good until it starts to get in the way of others. In Fenris's case, all he's seen from powerful mages is subjugating others who couldn't do anything against them, as visible as the scars across his body. Mages are dangerous, regardless of intention. They are a gateway to demons. But Fenris's idea of protecting the majority from mages is doing the same thing he preaches against. Organizations set to guard can easily be adjusted to oppress, dehumanizing those under their care and creating opportunities to vent their anger and fear at their existence. Anders has experienced that firsthand and knows that can easily lead to tyranny. As Hawk, you've seen more than most the balance between these two factions, both compassion and cruelty from both sides, as well as being personally affected by this conflict. It leads to this uncomfortable question if the ever-evolving conflict between the two is making each other worse and lead to more desperate actions. Whatever started this conflict has been transforming into something that's getting out of hand. In Act 3, Anders has a favor to ask you. Collect some materials and make a quick stop at the temple. The specifics are danced around and told not to be focused on. There's an interesting element in this scene I only caught this time through. No matter what happens, the thing Anders is planning is going to happen, whether you're a part of it or not. But what I find really interesting is if you express suspicion, ask questions about his reasoning, even saying something along the lines of, being your friend doesn't mean I need to agree with every action you do. If you say that, Anders will berate Hawk. You never really cared about mages. Oh sure, you said you would, but ultimately you're just talk. You're as bad as the Templars. It's some of the most vile stuff in the game because it's said purely to hurt you. Anders is no longer the person we met in Act 1. The mission is now the priority and he'll do anything to achieve it, even manipulating those he cares about. If you're friends with him, there's an additional tragedy to it in that final cutscene. He knows what's gonna happen, how bad it's gonna get, and chooses not to tell you so you don't feel complicit. You still might, because that outcome destroys the chance of compromise. When tensions reach a peak between the mages and Templars in the gallows, the abomination destroys the Chantry, leading to the rite of annulment and Kirkwall in flames. The ends justifying the means in Anders' eyes, believing the few suffering now will lead to other mages rising against oppressors across the world. It's a strange day when both the Knight Commander and the First Enchanter have the same look of horror. Though, replaying this, I realized there was some foreshadowing hours ago.
Just mix the ingredients up and boom. Justice and I are free.
I really should have caught that. In my defense, I thought he was speaking abstractly about the whole thing. This makes way more sense. My biggest takeaway from this moment is how, as a player, you feel cheated. Not just with an event you couldn't stop, but how Anders plays you to accomplish it. Your companion, and possibly a friend or lover, will cause a city to burn for his beliefs. It's a plot beat I would only see this game attempting, and then Hawk picks a side, Mage or Templar. There's no wiggle room here, 0 or 100. It's a frustrating choice, both in how it's one extreme or another, and because ultimately you'll fight both. Orsino and Meredith will be dead by the time credits rolls, an outcome forced by the development time. But I found one silver lining in this whole thing. If your sibling becomes a warden, they'll be there for the final battle. Their love for their eldest greater than duty for the mission. In Carver's case, he's at his best. You got him to become a warden, but he's made it his own. A unique purpose that brings him out of your shadow and into the light. And gotta say, the sun suits him. Now ready to offer a blade against anyone harming the only family he has left. When it wraps up and the epilogue plays, setting the stage for the next title, Inquisition, I find myself reflecting on the game as a whole. Dragon Age 2 is a title whose rushed development shows in a lot of ways, mainly its reuse of the same maps, predictable combat encounters, especially for boss design. Yet the narrative stuff is gutsy. Its attempt at telling a more personal story was my favorite takeaway. One where Hawke felt at the mercy of elements outside of their control. No matter how far they rise, they still lost people around them, yet they struggle on with their friends who do the same. With the Warden, I felt they showed the best in us, the hero who would band together with others no matter where they started and save the world. In Hawke, I see a person who struggled to exist, placed in situations where they cannot alter fate, and yet would build something new in the wreckage from before. In that sense, I find Hawke inspiring. And it also gets me to consider that as time marches forward, and it seems like the most vile and attention-grabbing things often shine in the spotlight, if we let ourselves get pulled down with it, will we become the very thing we would have distanced ourselves from years ago? Would we, much like vengeance, become a fragment of the person underneath, justifying more and more in the name of progress by our warped perceptions? I certainly couldn't tell you, but I will say I do find something oddly comforting in Dragon Age 2. It's not the kind of game I would break out very often, but it's one that stuck with me for years. For a game that highlights a strong sense of disempowerment, of being stuck at a place that isn't ideal or unfortunate events that occur regardless of our refusal, I find a sense of optimism about it. For as rough as life can get, people still keep trying it, jokes are still being made, and camaraderie is abound. And as the future becomes the present, it's easy to get disheartened and afraid of what may come next. The certainties of how life was supposed to go greatly clashing with the now. In a lot of ways, it's so easy to feel like Carver, but it's never over until it's over. The chance to begin again can occur every day. Here's a small example. Remember Gamlin, the uncle who tried hiding your mother's claim to the Hawke estate? Well, the game could have just had his involvement end there, but it keeps going. Years pass and he's still in your life. He informs you of your mother's disappearance during the killer questline, and there's even an opportunity to connect with his daughter he never knew. Even he, a character seen as a minor villain, has the opportunity for a better life when he tries. When I look at Dragon Age 2, it gets me to think, man, that's pretty bleak. But those characters are still trudging along, so maybe I should too. Where are my boots? Eventually, I plan to look into Inquisition, but that might be a while as it's pretty massive. I'll post updates on the channel's community tab as time goes along. Thank you so much for watching. I'm not quite sure how this one is going to turn out, but I've gone through enough versions of the script to be satisfied with it. I hope you got something out of this. If you're interested in that Inquisition video or any others I make, feel free to subscribe and click the bell to be notified when a new video comes out. Rate it however you wish and comment below if you have anything you want to share. Thank you again, and take care of yourselves.